Every storytelling tool you have at your disposal can make your script more engaging to read unless you misuse or overuse them. So I'm going to give you 6 different ways to use parentheticals in your script. 2 are good, 2 are not, and 2 are optional uses. But there is a big caveat with using them, and I'll get to that at the end. And while these 6 aren't all the ways to use them, these will get you 90% of the way there. And if you aren't sure what parentheticals are, they are merely a tool you can use within dialogue to communicate additional information to the reader. And if your script gets bought, they might communicate things to the director and the actors too. Parentheticals are related to the dialogue or to the immediate actions of the character speaking. If you don't have dialogue, you aren't using parentheticals. So keep in mind that anything in a parenthetical should be tied to the words being spoken by a character. And if you've read any screenplay, I'm sure you've seen them embedded within dialogue. The first good use of a parenthetical is clarity. At times, there just needs to be clarification. Like if you have a scene with several people and Simon says, "Don't do that," to whom is he speaking? And adding in a parenthetical of "to Mary" can clarify the line of dialogue. And this really is your goal when writing a screenplay: clarity. When I taught storytelling at Pepperdine, my students would probably get tired of hearing me say that clarity is king, and it is. If the reader doesn't understand or is confused, it goes poorly for you. So you want things to be clear, and parentheticals can help with that, and they can do it in a quick and efficient way. The second good use of a parenthetical is that it can communicate the intention of the dialogue. Why is a character saying what they're saying? So take this example. Mary, go to the concert with me. Simon, I'd love to go. And that is one way the exchange can go, and it's fine. But what if you add a parenthetical? Mary, go to the concert with me. Simon, lying. I'd love to go. Okay, the scene now has a completely different meaning. Now, maybe in the context of the scene, it would be clear that Simon is lying in the first example. But if it's not clear, this is extremely helpful in communicating to the reader what's going on with the dialogue. It helps to uncover the intention of the line. But this does start to lean into a couple of ways you shouldn't be using parentheticals. And the biggest thing you have to remember before you use any parenthetical is to determine if you really need to use it. Screenwriting is a practice in economy and efficiency. You don't do anything twice if you don't have to. If it's clear that Simon is lying, then you would not use the parenthetical of lying because that's redundant. It's the same thing twice, and you want to avoid all of those. So even if it's a good use or perhaps an optional use, which I'll get to in a second, if the parenthetical is communicating something the audience already knows, you shouldn't use it, even if it falls into the good use category. But there are 2 common bad uses of parentheticals, and the first has resulted in the nickname for parentheticals, and you may hear some refer to them as Rileys. And that's because bad use number 1 is using a parenthetical to communicate how a line of dialogue should be delivered or performed. Mary, Riley, oh, I love green beans. And the reason this is bad is not because it's necessarily wrong, it's because you, as a writer, are stepping out of your lane and into the lane of performance, which is the domain of the director and the actors, not the writer. Your job is to communicate intention. It is not to direct the performance. And what happens is if you have parentheticals like this in your script, my guess is that you are also spending a lot of time in your script micro-directing the characters, like you're some kind of puppeteer pulling strings. Simon stands up, stretches his back, limps around the couch toward the bar where he reads the labels on what's available, smells the bourbon, opts for tequila. And I get it, you see it in your head and you've been told to write down what you see. But that's not great advice. It might get you started, but it's just too much when all you need is Simon limps to the bar, pours a tequila. Now, the director might have Simon smell the bourbon, maybe even get a sample, but that's not your job to determine. Of course, there's exceptions. There's always exceptions. But there would need to be a story reason why Simon smells the bourbon for you to put it in your script. Maybe he's wrestling with sobriety, limps to the bar, smells the bourbon, as close as he's going to get, pulls out a bottle of water from the fridge. That's a story reason. But if it's not a story reason, you might be over-directing. So are there places to add in longer descriptions like this? Well, sure, but generally you want to stay out of that lane. And if you have parentheticals that are essentially Rileys and telling actors how to deliver or perform a line of dialogue, you are out of your lane. And I can guarantee you that your script, if you're doing that your script is overwritten in a lot of other ways. So if it's a performance parenthetical, and most of those you can identify because they're adverbs, words that end in ly, like Riley, smugly, confidently, arrogantly, things like that, remove them. The second bad use of a parenthetical is when you bury exposition within it. Something the reader needs to know, but you aren't sure where else to put it, and it ends up in a parenthetical. Mary, go to the concert with me. Simon hates jazz music. Think I'll pass. If there is exposition, which is information the audience must know to make sense of the story, you haven't communicated that elsewhere, a parenthetical, that's not the place for it. Okay? You need to find a better way, more clever way to get that information across. And essentially, these two bad uses of parentheticals are the result of lazy writing. If you're feeling like you have to direct a performance, it's because you haven't done a good enough job at creating a compelling character. And if you're including exposition, it's because you haven't done a good enough job of communicating need-to-know information to the audience. You're smarter than that and better than that, so avoid those two uses. But there are some optional times when you can use parentheticals, and the first of those is for pacing. Now, most often you will see this as beat or pause within the dialogue, and those totally can work if you need them and if punctuation won't do it. But here's an alternative. For a beat, just use an ellipsis, 3 dots. Everyone reads that as a beat. We just pause when we read it. A pause is a longer beat, and that can be done by just breaking up the dialogue. Simon's washing his hands. Simon, I'm not sure I like that option. He stops washing, considering. Definitely sure I don't like it. So you can use some action to insinuate a pause. Of course, you can write it this way, and that works too. So you do have options, but what works for one story won't necessarily work for another. I've had scripts where I use more parentheticals of pause or beat, and I've had scripts where I don't use either of those. It's up to you. The other optional parenthetical is when you use them to indicate the source of the dialogue. So for instances, when it's tied to OS, so Simon OS filter phone, I'll be right there. If you do that a lot though, or if it's a long phone conversation, it can become a bit unwieldy and it makes the page just look a little bit clunky. Now generally, it should be clear the character's on the phone. But there is also the cousin to this one, which is when you have someone speaking in a foreign language and the dialogue should be subtitled. So you might have something like Simon, Italian, subtitled, I'll be right there. But just for a moment, imagine Simon is on the phone and is also speaking in Italian that is subtitled. The parentheticals in that scene are going to get out of control in a hurry, and it kind of makes the page almost unreadable. And this brings us to the big caveat of using parentheticals and really using any storytelling tool. Overuse is very, very bad. Not because it's wrong, but because it distracts the reader and takes them out of the story. Remember, parentheticals are being directly communicated to the reader in most cases. You're talking directly to them through a parenthetical. But when you do it too often, you keep pulling them out of the story, and they can't get lost in the script because you keep interrupting them to tell them something. Filter, phone, beat, pause, Riley. And it's annoying to read. And the last thing you want to do is annoy your reader. But if you want to know how to do that, watch this. Thank you for watching. Fun buttons and links below. And when you tell a story, don't overdo it with too many parentheticals. But tell a story that matters. See you later.